The art of war is usually defined by overwhelming force, careful strategy, and precise planning. But what happens when those fail? And the only path to victory lies in the outrageous and insane. History shows us that the sharpest weapon is not always the sword, but the ability to outwit the enemy's mind. Today, we uncover 10 military tactics so bizarre, so audacious, and so utterly unthinkable that they should have failed, but instead changed the course of history. At number 10, we journey back to 52 BCE and uncover one of the most bizarre yet brilliant gambles in military history, the Siege of Alesia, where Julius Caesar faced what seemed like certain doom. The Gallic leader Vercingetorix, commanding an enormous army of 80,000 warriors, found himself trapped within the fortified city of Alesia. Caesar, determined to crush the Gallic resistance once and for all, ordered his men to build a massive encircling wall known as the Contravallation, sealing the enemy inside. But just as victory seemed within reach, disaster struck. News arrived that a gigantic Gallic relief army, numbering perhaps 250,000, was advancing to surround Caesar's 40,000 to 50,000 troops from behind. Most commanders would have fled instantly, but Caesar made a decision so insane it defied reason. He ordered a second, outward-facing wall, a circumvallation, effectively trapping his own army between two hostile forces. For weeks, Roman soldiers toiled like machines, digging trenches, erecting barricades, and laying deadly traps, creating a staggering 40-kilometer-long fortress. The final confrontation was brutal, lasting 3 full days, with waves of Gauls hammering both the inner and outer defenses. On the third day, 60,000 Gallic warriors, led by Versacevellaunus, nearly broke through a weak spot. In that desperate moment, Caesar himself donned his crimson cloak, rallied far cohorts, and led a cavalry charge that smashed into the enemy's flank. The unexpected counterattack sent shockwaves through the relief army, causing them to collapse in panic. The besieged defenders, now abandoned, surrendered the next day. This was no ordinary victory. It was a tactical miracle. By turning his vulnerability into a trap and relying on engineering genius, Caesar not only secured Gaul but also demonstrated how sheer audacity and psychological warfare could crush an enemy vastly superior in numbers. The Siege of Alesia remains one of the strangest and most daring feats in ancient warfare. Sliding into number 9, we uncover a tactic that proves war has never been about swords and shields alone. It has also been about terror. Long before chemical and biological weapons became part of modern arsenals, ancient warriors devised nightmarish ways to infect their enemies. The Scythians, a nomadic people of the 4th century BCE, perfected a chilling strategy. They dipped arrowheads in foul mixtures of rotting flesh, animal dung, and contaminated blood. The idea wasn't to kill instantly, but to ensure that even a shallow wound would fester into a lethal infection, often leading to tetanus or gangrene. This grotesque innovation transformed every arrow into a weapon of disease. Later, the Romans, too, embraced similar methods, smearing their blades with decomposed blood and waste to guarantee their enemies would not only bleed, but also suffer slow, agonizing deaths. Even earlier, around 1500 BCE, the Hittites described in their records a practice of driving plague victims into rival territories, deliberately spreading epidemics as a form of primitive biological warfare. What makes this tactic so bizarre is that these civilizations had no real understanding of bacteria or viruses, yet they intuitively grasped the horrifying outcome of contamination. The psychological effect was even greater than the physical one. Soldiers who feared not only the battlefield, but the possibility of dying in agony from infection, often lost the will to fight. Imagine facing an enemy knowing that the smallest cut might lead to days of unbearable pain before death. That dread alone was enough to weaken entire armies. This was not honorable combat. It was calculated terror designed to break morale before a battle even began. The Scythians' plague-ridden arrows prove that bizarre ingenuity in warfare often comes not from new weapons, but from turning nature's horrors into strategic tools. At number 8, we move to the icy winter of 1776, when General George Washington made a decision so unconventional that it changed the course of American history. The Revolutionary War seemed all but lost. Washington's ragged Continental Army was battered, starving, and on the verge of collapse, with enlistments set to expire at the end of the year. If he did nothing, the rebellion would die. So Washington took a gamble that broke every military rule of the era. He planned a daring attack on the Hessian garrison at Trenton. Not in daylight, not in fair weather, but on Christmas night. During a violent snowstorm, and across the frozen Delaware River. Conventional wisdom said no sane commander would risk such madness. Soldiers rarely campaigned in winter, never launched assaults in the dead of night, and certainly didn't attempt to ferry thousands of men across an ice-choked river during a blizzard. Yet, against all odds, Washington ordered 2,400 troops into boats and forced the crossing. The storm was brutal. Snow, sleet, and icy winds battered the men, delaying the operation by hours. By the time the army reached New Jersey, they were exhausted, frozen, and far behind schedule. Many urged Washington to abandon the plan, but he pressed on, knowing retreat meant death for the revolution. Meanwhile, the Hessians in Trenton, overconfident and celebrating the holiday, dismissed warnings of an attack, believing no army could move in such conditions. Just before dawn, Washington struck. The Americans poured into Trenton, overwhelming the garrison and capturing nearly 1,000 Hessian soldiers while losing only a handful of men themselves. The victory electrified the colonies, turning despair into hope and reinvigorating the fight for independence. Washington's crossing wasn't just a military triumph. It was proof that the most bizarre, risky decisions can shatter expectations and rewrite history. At number 7, we witness a weapon so terrifying that it seemed to defy the very laws of nature. Greek fire, the Byzantine Empire's most mysterious and devastating invention. Emerging in the 7th century, this incendiary liquid was said to have been created by Kallinikos, a Syrian architect, though its exact formula has been lost forever. What made Greek fire so bizarre was not simply its destructive power, but its unearthly quality. It could burn on water. Imagine a naval battle where the sea itself turned into a raging inferno, flames clinging to the waves and swallowing entire fleets. Byzantine warships were fitted with bronze siphons that spewed this hellish substance like dragons breathing fire, accompanied by thunderous sounds and clouds of choking smoke. To enemy sailors, it was as if the gods themselves had cursed them, for no bucket of water or desperate leap overboard could save them. Greek fire was not just a weapon. It was a psychological terror, a nightmare that reduced even the most disciplined armies into chaos. Used decisively in the defense of Constantinople against Arab and Venetian fleets, it turned hopeless situations into astonishing Byzantine victories. The secrecy surrounding it amplified the fear. The empire guarded its recipe so jealously that no other civilization ever replicated it. When the Byzantines finally fell centuries later, the formula vanished with them, leaving historians only to speculate whether it contained petroleum, resins, or something far stranger. What mattered most was the terror it inspired. Greek fire was not about overwhelming numbers or brute force. It was about demoralizing an opponent before the battle had even begun, convincing them they were fighting against a weapon touched by the divine. Truly, it was one of the strangest and most fearsome tactics to ever work on the battlefield. At number 6, we find the masters of psychological warfare, the Mongols, who in the 13th century swept across Asia and Europe with tactics so unorthodox that entire kingdoms fell before them. Led by the legendary Genghis Khan, the Mongols were not merely brilliant horse archers, they were cunning illusionists of war. One of their most bizarre tactics was deception on a grand scale. At night, they would order each warrior to light multiple torches, tricking their enemies into believing they faced an army many times larger. On the battlefield, they dragged ropes or branches behind their horses to raise massive clouds of dust, creating the illusion of a colossal advancing force. Yet their most infamous trick was the feigned retreat. In the middle of combat, Mongol troops would suddenly turn tail and flee as if routed, luring their enemies into reckless pursuit. To overconfident commanders, this appeared to be a golden opportunity until the trap snapped shut. The retreating Mongols would wheel around in perfect coordination, unleash a storm of arrows, and charge the disorganized enemy with devastating effect. What seemed like cowardice was in fact a disciplined, rehearsed maneuver requiring impeccable timing. Entire armies from the Russian principalities to the mighty knights of Europe fell victim to this bizarre tactic. The brilliance lay not in brute strength, but in exploiting human weakness, pride, overconfidence, and the eagerness to chase down a fleeing foe. By turning retreat into a weapon, the Mongols turned the predictable into the unexpected, transforming hunters into prey. Their empire, which became the largest contiguous land empire in history, was built not just on the bow and horse, but on the terrifying ingenuity of tactics that seemed irrational, yet worked with frightening precision. At number 5, we meet the legendary Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca, a commander known for his daring alpine crossing with elephants, but also for one of the strangest naval tricks ever recorded. In 184 BCE, During a clash against King Eumenes II of Pergamon, Hannibal unveiled a tactic so bizarre that it sounded more like a myth than history. Instead of relying solely on rams and arrows, Hannibal ordered his men to scour the countryside, capturing venomous snakes by the hundreds. These writhing creatures were sealed into clay pots, creating what could only be described as ancient biological grenades. During the height of the sea battle, his soldiers hurled these pots onto enemy decks. When they shattered, chaos erupted. Furious serpents slithered across planks, sinking fangs into terrified sailors, who screamed and abandoned their posts in blind panic. Trained warriors, drilled for combat, instantly dissolved into disorder, some leaping into the sea to escape the venomous threat. Hannibal's own forces barely had to fight. The psychological terror of the snakes did the work for them. What makes this tactic especially fascinating is its genius simplicity. The snakes weren't meant to kill entire armies. They were meant to shatter morale, disrupt discipline, and spread fear faster than any weapon of steel. In a matter of moments, an organized naval force became a mob of terrified men. Hannibal proved that true military brilliance doesn't always lie in bloodshed, but in exploiting fear itself as a weapon. By turning nature's most feared creatures into instruments of war, he achieved victory in one of the most unusual and bloodless naval strategies ever recorded. At number 4, we encounter one of the strangest psychological tricks in the history of warfare, an army that used cats as weapons. In 525 BCE, Egypt faced invasion from the Persians under King Cambyses II. The Egyptians were not only skilled fighters, but also fiercely religious, with deep devotion to Bastet, the goddess represented by the cat. Killing or harming these sacred animals was considered sacrilege, punishable by death. Cambyses understood this cultural reverence and turned it into a weapon. As his army advanced on the Egyptian stronghold at Pelusium, the Persians carried cats and other revered animals in front of their lines, even painting the goddess Bastet on their shields. When the Egyptians prepared to fire their arrows, they froze. Any strike risked killing a sacred creature, an act they believed would bring divine wrath upon them. This hesitation proved catastrophic. With their archers paralyzed by faith, the Egyptians watched helplessly as the Persians broke through their defenses, slaughtering tens of thousands and capturing the city. The fall of Pelusium marked the collapse of Egypt's first dynasty to a foreign conqueror. What makes this tactic so bizarre is that it weaponized not steel or fire, but culture itself. Cambyses turned his enemies' deepest values into shackles that bound them in their most desperate moment. It was a reminder that sometimes the most effective weapon is not force, but understanding how to manipulate the very beliefs that hold an army together. At number 3, we step into a scene that sounds more like myth than history. Flaming pigs. In 266 BCE, the Greek city-state of Megara was besieged by Antigonus II Gonatas, whose army fielded the terrifying weapon of the era, armored war elephants. These colossal beasts were virtually unstoppable, striking terror into any infantry line. But the Megarians discovered a weakness. Elephants despised the squealing of pigs. Desperation sparked creativity, and the defenders devised a shocking plan. They drenched a herd of pigs in pitch and crude oil, set them ablaze, and released them screaming and flaming toward the enemy's war elephants. The chaos was instantaneous. Terrified by the sight, sound, and smell, the elephants panicked, trampling their own soldiers as they stampeded back through the Macedonian ranks. What was once the pride of Antigonus's army became its undoing, as the mighty elephants turned into weapons against their masters. The siege collapsed in utter chaos, with Megara securing victory in one of history's most bizarre battles. This strategy revealed a brutal truth of warfare. Sometimes the strangest, most desperate measures succeed where steel fails. By exploiting animal psychology, the defenders turned helpless livestock into a weapon of terror. The flaming pigs of Megara remain a legendary example of unconventional ingenuity, proving that even the mightiest war machines can be undone by the smallest, most unexpected creatures. At number 2, we witness a spectacle of sheer terror unleashed by Timur the Lame, the ruthless Mongol Turkic conqueror whose empire stretched across Asia. In 1398, Timur marched on Delhi, where the Tughlaq army prepared to meet him with their most formidable weapon, armored war elephants with poisoned tusks. These giants were meant to crush Timur's cavalry and terrify his troops into retreat. But instead of charging head-on, Timur created a nightmare that turned the battlefield upside down. He ordered camels loaded with wood and hay, then set them ablaze as the elephants advanced. Driven forward by iron prods, the screaming, burning camels ran straight at the enemy. The sight and sound sent shockwaves through the elephants. Already prone to panic, they bolted in terror, trampling their own soldiers in a deadly stampede. In the chaos, Timur's forces swept in, cutting down the disorganized enemy and seizing one of the richest cities in the medieval world. The brilliance of this bizarre tactic was not its cruelty, but its psychological precision. Timur knew that fear, noise, and fire could cripple even the strongest weapon in his enemy's arsenal. By sacrificing camels, he flipped the battlefield dynamic, turning elephants, their greatest strength, into a fatal liability. It was a chilling reminder that victory in war is often decided not by sheer numbers, but by the ability to break an opponent's will with shock, confusion, and terror. Finally, at number 1, we uncover perhaps the strangest deception of all time, a plan so bizarre it sounds like a spy novel. Yet, it changed the course of World War II. In 1943, the Allies prepared to invade Europe through Sicily, but the Germans expected the attack there and had fortified the island heavily. To mislead Hitler, British intelligence launched an audacious scheme codenamed Operation Mincemeat. They obtained the body of Glyndŵr Michael, a homeless man, and transformed him into the fictitious Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. Dressed in uniform, the corpse was planted with carefully forged documents, including letters suggesting the Allies planned to invade Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily. To make Major Martin believable, they added personal touches, love letters, a photograph of a fiancé, theater ticket stubs, even a bill for an engagement ring. The body was released off the Spanish coast, where it soon reached Nazi hands. The deception worked flawlessly. Convinced by the detailed backstory and the secret documents, Hitler redirected troops to Greece, leaving Sicily vulnerable. The Allies landed successfully, changing the momentum of the war. Operation Mincemeat proved that sometimes the strangest ideas, using a corpse as a secret agent, can reshape global events. It was not won with tanks or bombs, but with imagination, audacity, and the power of a perfectly crafted lie. The man who never lived became the man who saved thousands of lives, securing his place as the most bizarre yet brilliant tactic in military history. The history of warfare reminds us that the greatest victories aren't always won through sheer force, but through imagination, deception, and an uncanny understanding of the enemy's mind. From flaming beasts on battlefields to fictional identities that fooled entire nations, these bizarre tactics proved that creativity can be deadlier than any weapon. In the end, war is not only fought with swords and guns, but with ideas that defy convention. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all is this: sometimes the most unthinkable strategy is the one that secures history's most decisive triumphs. If you enjoyed this journey into the strange side of military history, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories.